Sometimes without realizing it, we carry more than we can handle. Worries, commitments, relationships that no longer serve us. All of it weighs us down, and that weight isn't just in your mind. You feel it in your body, in your energy, in the way you face each day. Over time, we learn that happiness isn't always about adding more to our lives, but about letting go of what holds us back, what drains us, what no longer makes sense. But letting go isn't easy, especially when those burdens are tied to emotions, memories, or people you love. Today, we're going to talk about 7 things you might need to quietly remove from your life, without explanations, without guilt, to feel lighter, more at peace. These aren't dramatic decisions, but small steps toward a more authentic life, one that truly feels like yours again. My name is Gabriel, and if this is your first time here, I invite you to stay until the end. What you're about to hear might be exactly what you need to start making space in your mind, your heart, and your life. Let's begin. Number 1, other people's drama, even if you love them. Have you ever noticed how other people's worries sometimes become your own? It could be a child going through a rough time, a friend who can't seem to find a way out of their problems, or even a family conflict that indirectly involves you. When you love someone, it's natural to want to be there, to help, to support. But what happens when that love turns into a burden? When other people's problems start stealing the peace you worked so hard to build? Carrying other people's drama is something many of us do without realizing it. We justify it, telling ourselves it's our responsibility, that it's the right thing to do, that it's what's expected of us. But we forget that there's a difference between accompanying and solving, between supporting and taking control. When you cross that line, the price is often your own well-being. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Tranquility can only be found when we free ourselves from the weight of others' affairs." Sounds simple, right? But in practice, it's one of the hardest things to do, especially when it involves people you love. However, letting go doesn't mean abandoning them. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means recognizing that you cannot live other people's lives for them. I remember the story of Helen, a 70-year-old woman who had always been the backbone of her family. Every time one of her children faced a problem, she was the first to step in, ready to fix everything. When her youngest daughter went through a difficult divorce, Helen dropped everything: her time, her savings, even her health. For months, she dedicated herself entirely to being there, to being a refuge, to trying to mend the unfixable. But when it was all over, she wasn't just physically and emotionally exhausted. Her daughter told her something she never expected to hear. "Mom, I know you always want to help, but sometimes you make me feel like I can't handle my own problems." That comment made Helen reflect. In her desire to protect, she had unintentionally undermined her daughter's strength. In wanting to help, she had forgotten her own right to take care of herself. Helen realized that loving someone doesn't mean taking over their struggles, and that sometimes letting go is the greatest act of love you can offer. The Stoics teach us that everyone has their own path, their own lessons to learn. Epictetus once said, "We cannot want others to live as we think they should. We can only live our own lives with wisdom." And that includes learning to respect other people's battles, even when they hurt us. Imagine for a moment what your life would be like if you stopped carrying burdens that weren't yours. If you could be there for others without losing yourself in the process. You might feel guilty at first. That's normal. We've been taught that love means sacrifice. But no one tells us that sacrifice can turn into self-destruction. True love doesn't ask you to give everything until there's nothing left of you. True love is being there without imposing, supporting without solving, showing up without abandoning your own peace. Because only from that place of balance can you truly be of help to those you love. As humanist psychologist Carl Rogers once said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." The same goes for relationships. When you accept that you can't save anyone but yourself, you give others the freedom to save themselves. So ask yourself, how much weight are you carrying that isn't yours? How many times have you mistaken love for obligation, empathy for responsibility? Maybe it's time to let go, not out of selfishness, but out of love. Love for yourself and for others. Because when you stop interfering, you allow them to find their own way. And in the process, you regain something priceless, your peace. Remember, as Seneca once said, A man who is at peace with himself needs nothing from anyone. Take care of yourself, because only then can you truly take care of others. Number 2, the fear of rejection for saying no. How many times have you said yes when you really wanted to say no? Maybe you agreed to a favor you couldn't fulfill, an invitation you didn't want, or a responsibility that overwhelmed you. You did it because giving in was easier than facing the discomfort of rejection. But at what cost? Every time you say yes when you want to say no, you betray yourself a little. The fear of rejection is a weight many of us carry, especially with the people we love. We don't want to disappoint them, seem selfish, or risk losing their affection. This need to please others and meet external expectations often becomes an emotional prison that distances us from our own needs. Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard put it perfectly. The door to happiness opens inward. True fulfillment doesn't come from pleasing others, but from being true to ourselves. And being true to yourself means learning to say no when something doesn't resonate with you, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Let me tell you about Peter. At 68, he had built what seemed like a peaceful life, but he lived under constant pressure to please his family. If a friend needed help, Peter was there. If his son needed money, he found a way, even at the expense of his own well-being. One day, his grandson asked him to help with a move. Peter said yes, even though he knew his back couldn't handle heavy lifting. He ended up injured, unable to move for weeks. That's when he realized that his inability to say no wasn't just hurting him. It had also created a dynamic where everyone assumed he would always be available. Changing wasn't easy. The first time he said no, he felt a knot in his stomach. He feared his family would reject him, that they would think he was selfish. But what happened was surprising. Although there was some initial discomfort, his children began to respect him more. And Peter discovered something important. Real connection isn't about pleasing others. It's about being honest about what you can and want to offer. Learning to say no is an act of courage, not only because it challenges people's expectations, but because it forces you to confront your own fears. Researcher Brené Brown once said, "Clear is kind, unclear is unkind." Saying no with clarity can be the most loving thing you do for someone. When you say no, you give the other person a chance to find alternatives, to grow, and, most importantly, to understand that your time and energy have value. Think about this. Every time you say yes out of obligation, you are stealing time from yourself, time that could be spent on what truly matters. Saying no isn't selfish, it's necessary. It's the only way to protect your well-being while also building more authentic relationships. Imagine how your life would change if you could say no without guilt, without fear of rejection. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but over time you'll realize that the people who truly love you don't need you to say yes all the time to value you. In fact, your ability to be honest with yourself can strengthen those relationships. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you seek the approval of others, you will be their slave. But if you seek your own approval, you will be free." And freedom starts here, in the simple yet powerful act of saying no when you need to do it for yourself. Because no one can protect your time, energy, and peace better than you. This isn't about rejecting others. It's about choosing yourself. It's about recognizing that you can't pour from an empty cup. When you say yes out of guilt, obligation, or fear, you drain yourself. And what remains? Resentment, exhaustion, and a growing distance from your own needs. But when you say no with intention, you create space for the things and people that truly align with you. Paulo Coelho once said, "When you say yes to others, make sure you are not saying no to yourself." Think about that the next time you feel pressured to agree to something you don't truly want. Before you answer, pause. Ask yourself, am I saying yes because I want to, or because I'm afraid of how they'll react? If fear is your driving force, that's your cue to say no. Start small. Decline an invitation that doesn't interest you. Set a boundary when someone asks for more than you can give. The more you practice, the stronger your ability to say no will become. And soon you'll notice something remarkable. People will begin to respect you more, not less. Your relationships will deepen, not weaken. And most importantly, you will reclaim ownership of your life. So ask yourself, what are you afraid of losing by saying no? And is it worth losing yourself in the process? Choose wisely because every yes comes at a cost. Make sure it's one you're willing to pay. Number 3, the pairing nostalgia for who you once were. Have you ever caught yourself thinking about how things were 10, 20, or even 30 years ago? Maybe you remember a time when you were physically stronger, more socially engaged, or had a clear sense of purpose. Nostalgia has a strange way of creeping in, showing us an idealized version of the past that makes it seem better than the present. But here's the problem. When you spend too much time looking back, you miss what's right in front of you. Nostalgia can be comforting, a refuge when the uncertainty of the present feels overwhelming. It allows us to relive moments of happiness and accomplishment, to recall a time when we felt needed, successful, or more alive. However, nostalgia can also become a trap. When you idealize who you used to be, you inevitably start comparing it to who you are now. And that comparison is rarely fair. We tend to judge ourselves harshly. We say things like, I used to be able to do this, and now I can't. I was more useful back then. I was more attractive, more confident, more engaged in life. But is it really fair to measure our worth only by who we were in the past? The truth is, memory is selective. It remembers the highlights but filters out the struggles. The past was never as perfect as we imagine it to be. Seneca once said, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." When we cling to the past, we suffer twice. Once for what we think we've lost, and again because we deny ourselves the chance to enjoy what we have now. By constantly yearning for a past version of ourselves, we overlook the strengths, wisdom, and experiences that make us who we are today. The present can never compete with an idealized past. Maybe you don't feel as strong physically today, but you have a depth of understanding and perspective you didn't have before. Maybe your life is no longer filled with constant commitments and deadlines, but now you have time for yourself, for reflection, for learning. The present can feel uncomfortable because we don't always know what to do with it, but that's what makes it powerful. It's a blank canvas, an opportunity to reinvent yourself. Instead of looking back with longing, what if you looked forward with curiosity, not as someone trying to reclaim what's gone, but as someone open to discovering what's still possible? Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "Without music, life would be a mistake." And he wasn't just talking about literal music. He was referring to our ability to find beauty and rhythm in what we do. Even in the simplicity of a quiet day, there is music. But to hear it, you have to be present. You won't find it in a past that no longer exists. So how do you stop clinging to the past? The answer isn't to forget, it's to be grateful. Be grateful for who you were, for what you accomplished, for the people who were part of your journey. But don't stop there. Remember that your life didn't end in those moments. What you have now, even if it looks different, also holds value. Every stage of life brings something unique, and what you have today, this very moment, is a gift that the past cannot offer you. Eckhart Tolle said, "The present moment is all you ever have. Make the now the primary focus of your life." Stop looking back as if the best has already happened. You're still here for a reason. There are still experiences to live, laughter to share, lessons to learn. It doesn't matter if your body isn't the same or if your circumstances have changed. What matters is that you are here with the opportunity to make this moment count. Nostalgia isn't bad, but don't let it steal your present. Who you are now, with everything you've lived and learned, is more valuable than you've ever been. And that deserves to be celebrated, not compared. Instead of asking, "Why can't I be who I was?" ask, "What can I do with who I am now?" If you're enjoying this message and feel like you're discovering new ways to let go of what no longer serves you, I invite you to embrace the present fully. The life you have today is just as meaningful as the life you remember, if you allow yourself to see it. Stay until the end, because lesson number 7 might just be the key to living with more serenity and fewer worries about what you can't control. Let's keep going. Number 4, emotional dependence on your children. Number 4, emotional dependence on your children. There comes a time in life when our children are no longer little. They grow into adults with their own lives, responsibilities, and priorities. For many parents, this transition is difficult to accept, especially when their children's pasts lead them further away. both physically and emotionally. The closeness that once felt so natural now requires effort, and their attention is divided among careers, relationships, and personal pursuits. In these moments, it's easy to fall into an emotional trap: dependence. That deep-seated feeling that your well-being hinges on how often they reach out, how much time they dedicate to you, or how strongly they validate your role in their lives. It is completely natural to want to remain an important part of your children's lives. After all, you've spent years nurturing, guiding, and supporting them. But when that desire turns into a constant expectation, the relationship can become unbalanced, not because they are selfish or ungrateful, but because life moves forward. As they continue along their own paths, you too must find a way to continue along yours, independently of theirs. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "Nothing in the world has power over you unless you allow it." When your happiness is dictated by what your children do or don't do, you give them a power they were never meant to have. This doesn't mean you should become indifferent, nor does it mean your love for them is any less significant. It simply means that your self-worth and emotional stability cannot be tethered to their presence, approval, or attention. Recognizing emotional dependence. Emotional dependence on your children doesn't always manifest in obvious ways. It can appear subtly in the form of passive-aggressive comments when they don't call or visit often enough, a subtle guilt trip disguised as concern. "I just worry about you so much. I wish I could hear from you more." A sense of emptiness or sadness when days or weeks pass without hearing from them. An unspoken expectation that they should prioritize you over their own commitments. While these feelings are understandable, it's important to ask yourself, are these emotions stemming from love or from an unmet need that I must learn to fulfill within myself? Finding fulfillment beyond parenthood. Here's the truth. No matter how much you wish things were different, the only person who can truly fill that void is you. When you stop expecting your children to meet every emotional need, something surprising happens. You begin to find fulfillment elsewhere, in your own passions, hobbies, friendships, and personal growth. The love you have for your children doesn't need to be tied to dependence. You can cherish them deeply while freeing them from the weight of being responsible for your happiness. A healthy relationship is one in which both sides have the freedom to simply be, for you to live your life fully, and for them to build theirs without guilt or pressure. The poet Khalil Gibran wrote in The Prophet, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you but not from you, and though they are with you, they do not belong to you." This profound statement reminds us that while we have the privilege of raising our children, they are not possessions to be held on to. Their journey is their own, just as yours is yours. Shifting your perspective. This doesn't mean you should suppress your feelings of longing or pretend that distance doesn't affect you. Instead, it means practicing love without demands, presence without dependency, and connection without expectation. Cherish the time you spend with them, but don't make it the sole source of your happiness. Ask yourself, how would my life change if I stopped expecting my children to give me something only I can give myself? Perhaps you'd rediscover old passions or explore new interests. Maybe you'd deepen friendships or find joy in activities that once brought you peace. When you free yourself from the weight of emotional dependence, you make room for personal growth, self-discovery, and a renewed sense of purpose. The strength of unconditional love. When love is freed from expectation, it becomes stronger, more genuine, and longer lasting. A child who feels free to live their life without the guilt of not doing enough for their parent will likely cherish their relationship with them even more. By letting go of emotional dependence, you are not only taking care of yourself, but also strengthening the bond you have with your children. Love does not require attachment that exhausts you. It does not demand constant validation. Love in its purest form exists without conditions. As Marcus Aurelius once said, "What matters is not what happens, but how you interpret it." By shifting your perspective, you may come to realize that the love between you and your children does not have to be dependent. It only needs to exist in whatever form it naturally takes. And in that acceptance, you will find the peace and fulfillment that no external validation could ever provide. Number 5, objects that carry more emotional weight than practical value. I want to share something that happened to me a few years ago. I was helping an older friend organize his house, and as we sorted through a box full of old things, he picked up a small porcelain figurine and held it in his hands for a long time. Then he said, "This belonged to my mother. I've kept it all these years because it reminds me of her. But honestly, I don't even like it. I don't even know why I still have it." That moment made me think, how many things do we hold on to? Not because we need them, not because they bring us joy, but because letting them go feels like a betrayal of the meaning we've assigned to them. We often convince ourselves that these objects are an extension of our past, of our love for the people and moments they remind us of. But in reality, they are just objects. The emotions, the memories, the connection, they all live inside us, not within the things we keep. I have fallen into that trap myself. I once kept an old book for years, a gift from a friend who was no longer in my life. It wasn't a book I had ever read, nor was it a topic that interested me. But every time I saw it, I felt a pang of guilt at the thought of getting rid of it, as if doing so would erase something important. Until one day I realized something. It wasn't the object I was holding on to, it was the emotion. But that emotion wasn't inside the book, it was inside me. Letting go of certain things isn't easy, especially when they're tied to moments, people, or times that will never return. We fear that by removing the physical representation, we might lose the emotional connection as well. But what I've learned is that keeping objects out of emotional obligation doesn't connect us to the past. It traps us in it. It forces us to carry a weight that, in many cases, doesn't even bring us anything positive. Seneca once said, "No wind is favorable for the one who doesn't know where they're going." And he was right. Sometimes these objects are like anchors that keep us from moving forward, tying us to a version of ourselves that no longer exists, to a time that will never return. But we don't need objects to remember what truly matters. What truly matters already lives within us. When I finally decided to give away that book, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because I had forgotten that person, but because I understood that the memory remained with me even without the object. It was a reminder that love and memories don't need things to survive. Think about your own life. Is there something you're holding on to, not because it adds value to your present, but because you're afraid of what letting go might mean? Maybe it's an old letter from someone who hurt you, a piece of clothing from a time when you felt different about yourself, or a souvenir from a trip that once meant everything but now only fills space. If you pause for a moment and ask yourself, does this truly bring me something? Or am I holding on to it out of fear? You might find that the answer is clearer than you expected. This isn't about getting rid of everything or eliminating what brings you joy. It's about keeping only what makes sense, what still connects you to your present, not just your past. Because your space, just like your mind, deserves to be clear and at peace. By letting go of objects that carry more emotional weight than practical value, we make room for new experiences, for fresh perspectives, for a life that is lived in the present rather than through relics of the past. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing what truly deserves a place in your life now. And in that choice, we find a kind of freedom, a lightness that allows us to move forward unburdened by what no longer serves us. So take a look around your space. What are you holding on to? And more importantly, why? If the only answer is guilt or nostalgia, perhaps it's time to set yourself free. Because true connection, true love, and true memory don't live in things. They live in you. Number 6, relationships that drain more than they give. There's something that happens over time. We start valuing quality over quantity. This applies to many aspects of life, but none more profoundly than our relationships. When we're younger, we often want to be surrounded by as many people as possible, believing that more friendships or connections will bring us more happiness. But as life unfolds, we come to an important realization. Not all relationships nourish us. In fact, some do the opposite. They drain us. This isn't about blaming anyone. Many of these relationships aren't obviously toxic, but they are unbalanced. Maybe it's a friend who only reaches out when they need something, yet disappears when you need support. Or perhaps it's a family member who constantly criticizes you or makes you feel inadequate. Even if they don't realize it, The issue is that when you allow these relationships to remain in your life without boundaries, you end up carrying an invisible weight. And that weight doesn't just drain your energy, it also influences your sense of self-worth and well-being. We are deeply affected by the emotional environments we surround ourselves with, often more than we consciously recognize. If your daily interactions are filled with negativity, judgment, or constant demands, it starts shaping your outlook on life, your confidence, and even your ability to pursue your goals. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "The most important relationship you have is with yourself." If you allow relationships that drain you to take up too much space, you're not just sacrificing your peace, you're also limiting your potential for growth and fulfillment. The impact of draining relationships. Imagine a garden filled with vibrant flowers, but also overgrown with weeds. If you don't tend to it, the weeds will take over, blocking sunlight and stealing the nutrients the flowers need to thrive. Draining relationships function the same way. They may not be malicious or intentionally harmful, but if left unchecked, they take up emotional space and leave little room for the relationships that truly enrich your life. This is why it's so important to evaluate the connections you maintain. Ask yourself, do I feel supported and valued in this relationship? Am I the only one making an effort to keep this connection alive? After spending time with this person, do I feel uplifted or emotionally exhausted? Do I hesitate to be my true self around them for fear of criticism or rejection? The answers to these questions can provide powerful clarity about which relationships nurture you and which ones drain you. The good news is that you don't always have to cut people off completely. In many cases, setting firm but compassionate boundaries can be enough to protect your peace. As psychotherapist Carl Rogers once put it, true freedom comes when we stop living to meet others' expectations and start living according to our own needs. If you have someone in your life who frequently brings negativity or drama, but whom you deeply care about, you don't have to abandon the relationship entirely. Instead, you can adjust how and when you engage with them. It's okay to limit certain interactions, to choose not to respond immediately to every request, or to decline invitations that feel more like obligations than joys. You can love people without allowing them to take more from you than you're able to give. At the same time, it's crucial to actively cultivate relationships that uplift and inspire you. Surround yourself with people who listen without judgment, who celebrate your victories, and who encourage you to be your best self. Even if these connections are few, they hold the power to transform your life. As Seneca wisely advised, choose your friends carefully, for they will be the reflection of your spirit. The power of solitude and self-discovery. Sometimes life pushes us into solitude, and that can feel uncomfortable. But solitude isn't the enemy, it's an opportunity. It allows you to rediscover who you are when you're not influenced by external pressures. It gives you space to reflect, to heal, and to strengthen your own relationship with yourself. From that place of clarity and self-assurance, you can make better choices about which relationships deserve your energy and which ones you're better off letting go. So ask yourself, who in your life leaves you feeling lighter, happier, and more like yourself? And who, on the other hand, leaves you feeling exhausted, insecure, or trapped in a dynamic you don't want? These questions aren't always easy to answer, but the clarity they bring can change everything. Protecting your emotional energy isn't selfish, it's necessary, because only when you are at peace with yourself can you truly offer your best to others. And that, more than anything, is what creates relationships that are meaningful, fulfilling, and built to last. Number 7, the need to justify yourself to others. One of the heaviest burdens we carry in life is the constant need to explain ourselves, our decisions, emotions, and way of living, just to be accepted by others. Perhaps you found yourself justifying why you'd rather stay home than attend a social event, why you choose to spend money on something that brings you joy instead of saving for something deemed more practical, or why you are making a career change that others see as unnecessary. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself where this need comes from? Often it's rooted in a deep-seated desire to be understood, to avoid conflict, and to keep the peace. We want to be accepted. We don't want to be misjudged. But when the habit of justifying yourself becomes second nature, something harmful happens. You start depending on the approval of others to validate your own life. And when that happens, you inevitably shrink. Psychologist Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But to do that, you need to stop living as if you owe everyone an explanation. You don't have to justify why you take time for yourself, why you distance yourself from relationships that no longer serve you, or why you prioritize your well-being over the expectations of others. Your life is yours, and only you fully understand the reasons behind your choices. Others may judge from the outside, but they don't live your days, feel your emotions, or face your struggles. Explaining everything won't necessarily make them understand better. It will only drain your energy and reinforce the false belief that their approval is required for your happiness." Marcus Aurelius once said, "If you worry about what others think, you will be their slave." And it's true, when you constantly justify yourself, you're allowing other people's judgments to dictate your inner peace. You're giving their opinions more weight than your own. That doesn't mean you have to be indifferent or arrogant. You can be kind, you can be considerate, but you can also say, "This is what I need, and I don't have to explain it." That is a form of respect, both for yourself and for others. The power of not explaining everything. Imagine you decide to start a new hobby, something you've always been curious about, but that seems unusual for someone your age. Maybe you want to learn an instrument, take dance classes, or explore a new language. You might get curious looks or comments like, "Why would you do that now?" But here's the key. You don't have to explain why. The only reason you need is that it excites you, inspires you, and makes you happy. When you let go of the need to justify yourself, you reclaim your freedom. You start making choices that bring you closer to who you really are, rather than bending yourself to fit someone else's mold. Yes, some people may not understand, but here's the truth. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be at peace with yourself. The cost of seeking approval. Think about how many times you've held back from something you truly wanted just because you were afraid of what others might think. Maybe you wanted to move to a new city, change your career path, or step away from commitments that no longer serve you. But fear of judgment held you back. People's opinions are temporary. Your peace of mind, on the other hand, can last a lifetime. The truth is, no matter how much you explain yourself, some people will still not understand, and that's okay. As author Anais Nin said, "We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are." Those who don't understand your choices are viewing them through their own lens, their own fears, and their own limitations, not yours. Letting go of the burden. The next time you feel the urge to justify yourself, pause. Ask yourself, am I explaining this because I want to, or because I feel obligated to? Remind yourself that you don't owe anyone an explanation for prioritizing your mental and emotional well-being, walking away from relationships that no longer serve you, pursuing what brings you happiness, even if it doesn't make sense to others, making life choices based on your own values and not societal expectations. Living without justifying yourself doesn't mean ignoring others. It means being true to yourself with both respect and confidence. Because when you allow yourself to live authentically, you free yourself from one of the most unnecessary burdens you can carry. And that kind of freedom, it feels like a deep relief, like coming home to yourself. Throughout this journey, we've explored the silent burdens we often carry without even realizing it. Relationships, objects, thoughts, fears, all those things that, while seemingly harmless, end up taking space, draining energy, and stealing our peace. But here's what truly matters. Letting go is not a loss. It's an act of liberation, a step toward a lighter, more authentic life. Life isn't measured by how much we accumulate, but by how much we are able to truly enjoy it. And when you remove what no longer serves you, you make room for what truly matters. The peace of being yourself, the joy of living in the present, and the opportunity to reinvent yourself again and again. If you've made it this far, it tells me that you truly value personal growth, and I want to acknowledge you for that. To see who stayed until the end, comment the phrase, "I live in freedom." I'd love to hear from you and know who's on this journey with me toward a fuller, more peaceful life. And before you go, share this video with someone who might need it. Maybe there's someone in your life who could benefit from these words today.